Okay, part 2. Let's see if the coffee's kicked in this one so I can get through these books more quickly. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and today I bring you my July wrap-up part 2. You can find the link to part 1 down below. Let's just get into it. Books. So let's start with one that I don't have that much to say about, and that is El Remitente Misterioso y otros relatos inéditos by Marcel Proust. Basically, this is a collection of previously unpublished stories that I thought were unpublished in Spanish, but no, they are unpublished. Like, they were recently discovered, and I don't believe these have been published in English just yet. But they probably will because Proust is such a big deal. Here's the thing, this was my first Proust, and it was totally the wrong way to start. So here's the thing, I thought these stories were fully fledged stories that had been kept away from publication by Proust because they were explicitly homosexual, and some of them are that. But a lot of them are just literally sketches or like ideas that would then serve for things that Proust actually published, namely In Search of Lost Time. And although I really want to read In Search of Lost Time, I haven't yet. Therefore, a lot of the commentary here meant nothing to me. And that was another thing that I despised, was the commentary. It was so pretentious. I don't know who made these notes, but I don't want to read their books ever. I don't know if they were from the Spanish language publishers or the French language publishers, so they were in the original, but it was just so boring. It's not that what they were saying is boring, because when I stripped away all the dense, horrible prose, I understood what the analysis was. It's just, it was conveyed in the most boring style ever. That said, I did really enjoy Proust's prose, and so I'm really looking forward to reading In Search of Lost Time now. I think it's one of those books that I'm really going to enjoy. You can sense, even through these sketches, his interest in the human condition. It's very sensory. Oh, and he has this description, I think it's this one, I did mark it up. In case you're curious, it's in a story that would roughly be called after Beethoven's 8th Symphony, and it just describes music in a way that I've never experienced before in writing. So it only made me more eager to read Swan's Way. But I still don't recommend you start with this. Then the first book I finished in July actually was Ariel by Sylvia Plath. This was part of my Danny Picks My 5-Star TBR video. I'm going to link it down below. I have actually finished that, but the last of those books you will find in my August wrap-up. So I really spaced out the reads. I think it was good that I did because I really enjoyed it. So if you saw my June wrap-up, link down below, you will remember that I loved the Matisse stories and Sharp. I loved Ariel as well. I marked it up so much. You can't see it, I think, because it's yellow colored. Oh yeah, you can see some of it. I just understand it now. I think she is the epitome of obscure but still very musical and very visual poetry. I think her poetry is actually quite difficult, at least it was for me. I have never studied her. I was supposed to study her in my poetry survey course, but then the 2019 protest occurred and that course closed earlier. So I just didn't. I am very much looking forward to picking up Red Comet then, so I can get a bit more of a sense of her writing. I mean, I have read The Bell Jar, which I thought was excellent, but I still feel like I need more context to fully understand these poems, because a lot of the times I felt like I was kind of getting what she was getting at, and I was definitely enjoying the form of the poem, the sound of the poem, the imagery in the poem, but I still needed a bit more. So I'm looking forward to studying her a bit more, but I did enjoy the poetry here. There is a lot to do with death and belonging and sanity and sort of lack of connection or connections that are too intense, and about heritage. It's just wonderful. Since we're there already, let's talk about the fourth book that I read for Danny Picks My TBR, and that is La Escuela de Carne by Yukio Mishima. I said this would roughly translate to the School of the Flesh, but I looked for it and I don't think this one is translated into English, which is very sad. I actually think more of Mishima's works are translated into Spanish than in English, which is interesting. Really enjoyed this. It is not my favorite Mishima, but I got so much out of it. It was so fascinating. Okay, so this is about Taeko. Yes, Taeko, and she has a group of friends and they meet at this restaurant. I think the restaurant varies, but they go out a lot and they update each other on their different career and guys escapades. Taeko is a couturier and she has a friend that is a film critic. She has another one, I think is not a chef, but she might be an artist. But yeah, they have different occupations. And Taeko gets involved with this younger guy who happens to work at a gay bar, and she doesn't know at the beginning if it's because he is gay or he's bi or he's just trying to make some money, but they start this sexual relationship. It's fascinating how the rules of attraction function between them, because in a way Taeko relishes being so in control, but at the same time she feels very much out of control, and so she doesn't really know what to think about herself, and she's trying to find that answer in other people. And I think that is the key of this book, how society shapes what we think of ourselves and others and how we act so much. There is so much here about protocol and the old versus the new ideals of behaving in public and privately, how that is linked to aesthetic beauty and to desire, and all of those are themes that are at the center of Mishima's work. Because he was so attracted to men, he found a way to make that legit by exalting these patriotic and masculine ideals of the samurai and the soldier. This is sort of the flip side of that, how he thinks a woman might see it. That is an interesting point. I don't think Mishima writes women exquisitely well, let's say. He had very complicated thoughts on femininity. I think he rejected a lot of it, which made him despise it a bit, but at the same time he was still fascinated by women, also because they got to experience aesthetics in a way that he felt was forbidden for him. It's just very interesting. I know I've talked a lot about Mishima and his view and how he incorporates that in his writing. I think that is the point. I think I'm a bad judge of Mishima's writing because I am so interested in his mind and in his aesthetic project, whether I agree with it or not. I just find so much in it that it's hard for me to know, okay, was this actually a good book or is it just that I'm so interested in it? It has its moments. I think it drags a bit compared to other books. This is on the thicker side for Mishima, although I have read Forbidden Colors, which I love. I think that book is objectively really good. This one I think is a bit more of a mess because Taeko is sort of drifting and she doesn't know herself. We also go along in that journey of self-discovery. In the end, it does pick up again, and I think the writing is overall pretty good. I don't know if it's that translation thing, but I've read different translations of Mishima. I like how he writes. So lush, and you can tell he loved, you know, Oscar Wilde and ornate, elaborate aesthetic appreciation things, but still he carries with him his Japanese heritage, so that merging, such a rich meeting point aesthetically. I don't think if you need to connect to characters that this will be the book for you, because Mishima is so cerebral in his dissection of the characters, but it's still so good. I really enjoyed it. You know, it's called The School of the Flesh, and it really does seem like by the end Taeko has developed herself, which I thought was surprising because I didn't think Mishima could be so generous to women, which is awful to say, I know. I don't know, he's just one of those authors that I keep returning to and finding stuff in. Danny is 444. However, I will have to say that I don't know if any of the books that I've read will make it to my top books of the year. I've just read so many great books. It's going to be a really tough year to pick. This book by Miaojin called Apuntes de un Cocodrilo in Spanish, translated by Belén Cuadra, but I have just seen the English version, so I know it's available. It's a New York Review of Books book, and I think it's called Notes on a Crocodile. This is a very curious, fragmentary book by one author that has become a fave. Sadly, I don't think she has more works, at least not translated into a language that I can read, but she was a Taiwanese author. She was a lesbian. She killed herself when she was quite young. She studied literature and she actually went to study in France, and the other book that I read by her I reviewed in my June wrap-up, linked down below as I've mentioned already. She had a really interesting outlook. This is not only about her relationship. Well, this is first, it's fiction, but it is again heavily autobiographical, and it's about the protagonist having a relationship with another woman, which turns quickly very obsessive. And that is very interesting because there is something that goes beyond sexuality, that is just the personality of the main character. She's very flighty. She doesn't want to commit emotionally to anyone, and that might be because she sees no future in it because she is a lesbian, but I just think is how this character is, and she feels very intensely. She's like, I'm deeply in love with you, but in the end she gets really nervous when things start getting real. There's also a plot line where the protagonist starts sort of dating a guy because she's trying new things, but the guy has also been in love before with like the love of his life, and he's also sort of seeing another guy, but he treats him like dirt, and it's very fascinating. It is very rough. I think all her writing is very rough, full of feeling. It's not very edited down, but it's still fascinating. If you want to experience that college intensity, technically I think this could be considered a campus novel, sort of. If you want to read about that intensity of feeling from a different perspective, I got a lot out of it, and it's fun. I think her style is actually great. She's heavily influenced by modernism, and again, this idea of talking about the media she's consuming and relating it to her experience in a way that I think is so relevant. I actually think she was so ahead of her time, and if she were to be rediscovered now, I think so many people would like her. It's a bit messy, it's very auto-referential, and it's just fun. I'm sorry, the dogs around here are going insane at this moment. Let's talk about Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This was the only thing I read for Jane Austen July. It still made me very happy because with this, I have finished all of Jane Austen's novels, at least the main ones. I'm still missing like Sanditon and the Watsons. But also with this one, I finished reading the books that are on this box set that Danny of Danny Picks My TBR fame gave me, I think when I turned 16. It only took me almost 10 years, but I did it, so yay. Okay, so what did I think about Mansfield Park? I've heard so many people say Mansfield Park is an underrated Jane Austen, and I agree to an extent. This book was such a trip for me, and sadly it wasn't a trip that ended very well because I loved the beginning. I say half of it, I was so in it, but then it sort of deflated, and I think the ending was a bit boring. I remember Katie from Books and Things talking about why Fanny Price is sort of underrated because she doesn't really have a character arc because she is already a fully fledged character at the beginning. I would have to agree. I think she's great. I also watched Olive's video on Mansfield Park and why a lot of people thought Fanny was too quiet and too weak and why that wasn't the case. And I never thought that. I actually thought from the beginning she was a badass. There come a family, or I think it's just the siblings, or is it the rest of the family? Anyways, and they dash all of Fanny's family, but Fanny's always like, I've got my eyes on you. So that could have been great, and it was great for a long time. It then sort of fizzled out. If you have a character that is already so fully formed, you need a messier plot, a stronger plot that is going to carry until the end. And this is one of her longer ones. I still think it's a really good book. I definitely liked it more than Persuasion. I did not like the book at all. I think it's a good book, but it's not extraordinary. I'm a bit meh about it, but I liked Fanny. The plot wasn't strong enough to support a story that was so long, where the character didn't have to undergo any major transformations because everything else had happened before the book started. Another book that I finally got to is The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I am so happy I finally read this. I really like Edith Wharton. although I must say, I don't think she's quite a favorite. I think I like her, I mean, not as a person. Supposedly she was very mean to everyone and she was very rude, but I like her, I mean, as an artist. Like, I enjoy reading her articles and her thoughts on writing, and I love reading her books, but they feel a bit temporary for me. While I'm reading them, I really love them, but when I'm not reading them, I am not thinking about them, if you see what I mean. But in any case, The House of Mirth is the story of Lily Bard. She is a young woman who I think comes from a disgraced elite family, so she has like tenuous ties with the elite, and she goes to New York in search of a husband, basically, and she needs to marry well. But the problem with Lily Bard is that she wants to have it all. In a way, she isn't decisive enough to get married with the guy that is a great prospect because she's in love with someone else, but that someone else is not right for her economically. Part of the interesting effect of this book is that you're actually kind of rooting for her to marry well. You want her to be successful, and you know, like she knows deep down that the only way that will happen is if she marries rich. She has her looks and she has to cultivate that. She is very charismatic. She knows how to get in with the crowd, but the problem is nothing is good enough for her because she doesn't really understand her own heart. She starts the book very driven and her flame shines bright, but then she slowly fizzles out, and it's a tragedy to watch. There is a paragraph here that I love. I don't know if it's a spoiler, well, but it describes sort of her world crumbling, and it's just so brilliant. It's just so good. I really recommend this. You should read The House of Mirth. It is really as good as everyone says. If you like Fitzgerald, for example, you cannot not read this. If you like Oscar Wilde, especially his society plays, you need to read The House of Mirth. It's just such an interesting story because Edith Wharton is savage. She judges them extremely harshly, and it's extremely entertaining to watch. But at the same time, she has a point. The Devil Finds Work by James Baldwin. This is a collection of 3 essays. I think it's 1 essay. Yeah, it's sold as 1 essay divided in parts. Yeah, anyways, this is all about representation, and specifically Black representation in film. And I think it's good, but it's a bit dated because either you need to be a big film buff to understand all the references, or you need to not care that you don't understand all the references. That said, I had read this book called Scenes from a Revolution, which was on my top nonfiction of last year. I'm going to link that video down below so you can check it out. And there they talked about 2 films that are referenced here, and they talked about Sidney Poitier, who was a Black actor, and he was very contentious because he only played very spectacularly good characters, and you know, that sort of put forth the idea that Black people had to be impeccably good people in order to be considered up to par with white people. That is one of the ideas that is explored here in depth, so it was helpful to have read that book. But still, I don't know, with Baldwin, now that I'm reading more of his nonfiction, when he goes broad, he's so on point, he's so smart, and I love the way he writes. But when he goes into analysis of things that are so specific, I think he could have used a bit more of an edit. Not only because I may not know all the references, but just because I think he sort of circles on the same idea, and not even just a repetition throughout the article, but also in the same sentence, if you see what I mean. I still enjoy this. I really recommend it if you are interested in representation in media, if you're interested in film studies. I think you should definitely read this, but I did not love this at the level that I've loved other Baldwin work. Let's talk about Consent by Vanessa Springora. This is a Spanish edition that is translated from the French by Noemí Sobregués, but I know for a fact that this is translated into English, so you can definitely check it out. I'm going to credit the translator down below. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it one last time. This in English is sold as a memoir, and in Spanish is sold as an autobiographical novel. I think that is fascinating and says a lot of the English language memoir culture, which is something I want to do a bit of a deep dive on at some point. I never really read memoirs. I didn't know memoirs by people who aren't famous, either like celebrity memoirs or author memoirs. I never knew that people could make a living only writing memoirs, or that like everyone wrote memoirs and you even have like workshops of memoirs. I just think it's very interesting. This is a story that definitely needed to be told. It's about Vanessa, who when she was 13 was groomed by an older and very well established author. They began a relationship, and here an asterisk, because everyone I hear talking about this, they mentioned how everyone was okay with it and how hard it was for Vanessa to realize that it was an abusive situation when everyone supported it, and that is not exactly the case. Actually, this book starts when there was already contention about this issue in France, because this author, just like a lot of other authors, supported pedophilia in a way that was almost harking back to those Greco-Roman times, almost as if it was a favor or an initiation ritual from the elder to the younger person. Of course, that has zero relevance to what society is now, and it is grooming and it is abusive, so it's such a non-argument, but it was an argument that was being discussed at the time. And again, the author was both very well regarded, but he was also infamous because he had published both fiction and essays where he discussed the topic. So I think that is very interesting. And I had to Google him because I didn't know who he was. Because of the initials, it's just very easy to find. And also they mentioned explicitly, unquote, one of the books he wrote. So even at the beginning, when she first started seeing him, her mom was against it because Vanessa felt so strongly about it. She sort of caved. And of course, there you may say, but how did she give into this? You need to read the book and find out. But even then, the mom found it very weird, and a lot of people around her found it very weird, but they didn't know how to not allow this to happen, because these conversations were taking place in intellectual circles. And she very quickly into her adolescence realized it was a very toxic thing, but of course she didn't know how to get out. She still loved him, and finally when she did get out, by that point he had become such a fixture of her life that her mom did say, oh, that's too bad, he loved you so much. So in that way, yes, people supported it, but it took time. It wasn't like it was normal. And I feel like a lot of people who review this book make it sound like, oh, everyone was super behind it and she had to fight against it. It wasn't quite like that. But of course he was very abusive, and he pushed her into sexual acts for which she was clearly not ready. Luckily, she got the guts to get out of there and then write this book. And I know this book has been very controversial in France, but in a good way, in a way that, oh, finally this is being spoken about and let's have these conversations. Writing wise, I really enjoyed it. She is very knowledgeable about literature. She references fairy tales. She also references Lolita and talks about why Lolita is not the same as the books that this guy wrote, because Lolita is not condoning pedophilia, and she weaves that into her own narrative. What I will say though is that because of the way she tells it, it's very disjointed, and it's sort of almost like a case study that she's conducting herself, which probably was necessary for her to get through this telling, that it was so hard. But at the same time, that makes it feel a bit disjointed, and like you never really get to feel exactly why she was with him, because she is already looking at it with so much perspective. So you don't get that emotional experience of understanding how she felt, because she's telling you how she felt, but again, it's very clinical, distancing herself from it. Again, maybe it was really necessary for her, and I don't think it takes away from the power of the memoir. I did appreciate, however, how she wove into her personal narrative these themes of whether this is ever okay, which is not, and she says so, and all these debates that went on after. So I really recommend it. I think it's really good. I think it's more complex than people credit it for. We're nearly there. The last book I finished in July, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Here's my thing with Kazuo Ishiguro. I keep feeling I don't like him because I hated Never Let Me Go so much. I hated having to read it because I had to finish it because we reviewed it for the podcast in Spanish, which is, by the way, always linked down below. So in case you do listen to stuff in Spanish, you can check that out. But the thing is that if we do percentage, I've loved almost everything I've read by Kazuo Ishiguro. I've read An Artist of the Floating World, loved it. A Pale View of Hills, really, really enjoyed it. This, loved it. Hated Never Let Me Go, and felt very meh about a story in Nocturnes that I read. And that is all my Ishiguro experience. You see, I've loved the majority of it. I loved this, and I actually think you should read it with An Artist of the Floating World, because I think this is the British counterpart to that. And I think actually this is more famous because it's the British counterpart. But I think actually An Artist of the Floating World is a bit, or maybe not better, but I just liked it more. Go read it if you haven't yet, because it's so good. So, The Remains of the Day. It's about this butler, Stephens, who is now serving an American master, and he's technically not a butler, not like he was before. He previously served Lord Darlington, who quickly we start learning was up to no good, but we don't know what it is, although we do get hints, and I think you can guess it quite quickly considering the date this takes place in, but I won't spoil it in case you don't know or can't guess. And it's about how this old-time hierarchical society is sort of crumbling and the old ways are no longer valid. Stephens doesn't really understand his new boss. He doesn't understand the banter. He doesn't know how to best serve him, and he starts looking back and sort of starts questioning his role. I actually body read this with Mariana and Natalie. I linked their channels down below so you can check them out. I think they got more optimistic readings of this than I did. I actually thought the whole thing was quite depressing, and although Stephens is looking for a way forward, I think he can never really step out any more of that butler ethos that has consumed his life. It's heart-wrenching but also enraging. We discussed how we felt about Stephens a lot. It was a cornucopia of feelings, but in my case I just pitied him because I think there isn't anything else there anymore, you see. So there is a question, because this is a first person narrative, of whether he is affecting the butler tone and affecting his memories in a way, because they are for the public consumption, for the reader, but at the same time there is the possibility that this is who he is. He has sublimated his humanity so much that he's little more than a butler, and there are very few moments where he allows himself to be more than a butler and to not have that mask on. The symbolism of the mask here is very interesting because, again, it's something that comes so much from Japanese culture, and you can also see that in An Artist of the Floating World here, and applies so well here with these structures that are so fixed in British culture. So the thing is, maybe he's not lying to us, it's just he's lying to himself. He just can't access that. On the other hand, maybe he is lying to us, who knows? It's just such a rich and textured narrative, compulsively readable, and I enjoyed seeing how Stephens shifted throughout the narrative, because there are changes. I don't think they are substantial enough to say he undergoes a transformation or that he arrives to any kind of significant conclusion, and I actually read the ending as fairly depressing, which I don't think everyone does, but that was my take on it. But you still see minor shifts, and I think all of that is fascinating. This is one of the best books I've read this year, so I'm glad to have finally gotten to it. I really recommend it, and I really want to watch the movie as well. By the way, this book and this book are part of my Gilmore Girls novel pairing reading challenge. I'm going to leave the link to the announcement down below because I have filmed the first wrap-up, but it's coming out after this one. In that one, I'll talk more about House of Mirth in relation to that challenge, and this one you will have to wait a couple months because I need to get to some other ones. But very exciting. I am making progress with that challenge finally, so please do check out that video down below. Oh my god, I'm so tired. I almost forgot to do the outro. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Please leave comments down below, and if you don't have comments about any of these books, let me know what you've been reading in July, or a book that you've bought, or something that you've loved recently. It's always good to spread the love. Everything mentioned is either written or linked down below, and my social media, everything in the box description. You know this already. Okay, see you next time. For my August wrap up, it'll be fine. it'll be fine. As you can see, I'm recording in front of a window once again, so that's why I had to record without glasses. Do I even know what I'm saying anymore? I have been speaking for so long. I don't know how to stop. Notes on a crocodile.